welcome to hour number 2 of Walking with Spirit, America's premier metaphysical and personal growth talk show. I'm Monique Chapman, your host, and I am so happy this hour to have author Neil Kramer with me. His latest book, The Unfoldment, is hitting the bookstores right now as we speak, and we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I do invite you to call in because, folks, this is going to be a very exciting and enlightening hour. Okay, so to participate, give us a call at 888-235-7374 or send a InQuick via the InQuick system on the Achieve Radio homepage. Now, a bit about me for my new listeners. Intuitive since birth. I'm a third-generation intuitive lifestyle consultant with over 3 decades of experience assisting people along their path. I'm a strategist for personal and professional transformation, revealing information which enables you to become a master builder of your life. I spent 25 successful years in corporate America as an executive sales professional, and I'm the founder of Healing Visions Ministries and the Northern California Children's Education Network, a 501c3 nonprofit. I also authored Getting Your M&Ms, the Men and Money book, now enjoying its 3rd printing and is available on Amazon.com, or for an autographed copy, do contact me directly. Now, I provide consultations and healings regarding relationships, business, career, money, and love that heal the mind-body-spirit connection, allowing you to live life to your fullest. Now, I've been told by my clients that I keep it real while providing them with accurate information to assist them along their journey as a spirit living a human existence. My background includes a doctorate in metaphysics, Reiki master teacher, ordained minister, clinical hypnotherapist, author, and media personality. I have assisted thousands of people worldwide, providing the steps necessary to live a full life right now, even in this economy. So when you're ready to release the blocks that are holding you back, or if you're stressed, stuck, confused, you're just wanting to change the circumstance of your life to the positive, call me. I can help. Now, when you mention the radio show when you call, this is what I've got, especially for the radio people. You pay for a full price session with me, and I'm going to give you an extra 15 minutes absolutely positively free. So that's a $50 savings. So you buy 15 minutes, you get 15 minutes. You buy an hour, you get an hour and 15 minutes, or any increment in between. Excuse me. So to take advantage of that, you can call me at 888-240-6057 or check out my website, MoniqueChapman.com. Love yourself enough to make the call. Now, you can find out more about me by checking out my website. And again, that's MoniqueChapman.com. I invite you to like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Bay Area Metaphysics. And I do invite you to join my absolutely positively free newsletter. You can join via Facebook or going to my website, MoniqueChapman.com. Just fill in the newsletter box, and you will get the newsletter. And that's all you receive from me via that link is just the newsletter. Okay, so you don't have to get spammed every 3 days with something new, because that's not how I do it. So, again, to join that, go to MoniqueChapman.com or follow me on Facebook. Now, as I said, I am so excited. I wish I had a drum roll. I'd use it right now. My guest this hour, Neil Kramer, is an English writer and philosopher specializing in the fields of consciousness, metaphysics, shamanism, and ancient mystical disciplines. Neil has made a lifelong independent study of philosophy, mysticism, shamanism, religious traditions, inner alchemy, occultism, and esoteric world history. He shares his path of transformation and empowerment in writings, interviews, lectures, as well as giving one-on-one teachings and group workshops. He's a frequent guest on leading alternative radio and internet shows, enjoying international audiences and enthusiastic support. His work is regularly published on cutting-edge websites, news portals, and popular media networks. His acclaimed essays and his audiobook, The Audio Cleaver, attract large, discerning audiences around the world, as do his DVD. Now, Neil speaks on many fascinating subjects and is renowned for his unique blend of lucidity, empowerment, and authenticity. Themes explored include spiritual philosophy, Transcending Control Systems, that's a good one. The Inner Work, Nestled Realities, Purifying the Vessel, The Roots of Mysticism, Paths to Authenticity, Encounters with Paradox, and Phenomena and Secrets of Inner Alchemy. Now, his latest book, as I mentioned, The Unfoldment, is available in stores now, and Neil has been so wonderfully kind to gift us with copies to give away on the show. Call in, ask a topic-specific question, send an email to Monique at MoniqueChapman.com, name, address, and phone number, and we'll connect and get the book out to you. If you're listening to this on the archives, give me a call, as I may have a copy left. Now, if you want to check out Neil while you're listening to him talk on the radio show, all you have to do is go to neilkramer.com. That's NeilKramer.com. Welcome to Walking with Spirit, Neil.
Well, thank you. Hello, it's nice to be here.
Hey, it's great to have you. Thank you for getting up, I believe, so early your time to join me. I really appreciate it.
Well, it would be if I was in England, but I am just over in Portland, Oregon, so I am not getting up early. It's at the evening, so I'm good.
Oh, okay, so we're on the same time zone.
We are, yes.
Say hi to my uncle. He's up there in Portland.
Will do.
I absolutely positively love the books, and folks who listen to me regularly will know that I don't say this about every book that I promote on air, and your book is a keeper. I absolutely loved it. When I read the title and it said, the organic path to clarity, power, and transformation, but, I said, oh, okay, another one of those secret books, and I'll get to it when I get to it. So I just tossed it in my pile, and, when I actually looked at it, reviewed it, I'm like, wow. Okay, because it was not what I expected. So this is a keeper that will go on my permanent bookshelf that I'm looking at. Like, I have about 800 books over there, so this is going to be like 801. I love how you integrate philosophy in the practical application of life. I mean, it just seems so natural reading it. It's like, well, why didn't others figure this out? Along the way. How did you get to this point of writing this great piece of work?
Well, I have been, as you said in your intro, studying philosophy and mysticism and esoteric practices and whatnot for probably just a little over 20 years now, quite rigorously, and I've made it really part of my life. It's not like just a job, it's not just a hobby, it's what I do, it's what I am. And so when you kind of decide, you take it upon yourself, to walk the talk, as it were, it puts a special emphasis on delivering a really, really authentic product. Because, as you say, there's so many self-help books out there. There's so many people who are trying to pretend that they've got the secret keys and what have you. And, titillate and scintillate audiences and say, read this book and everything's going to be swell afterwards. It wouldn't really be appropriate for me to say that. However, fortunately, the universe is such a magnificent and mysterious and adventurous place that I don't really need to. I can let the universe do that for me. So, to some degree, what I like to do is offer different perspectives on things we thought we knew about culture and politics, philosophy, mysticism, and so on, but not just leave that as something that someone else is doing, but something that you can truly bring into your own day-to-day existence. So for me, it's a practice more than it is an idea. And it's an exercise in something that you can do 24/7 all the time, more than it is just a philosophy. So we use that word philosophy, but just really all that word means is a love of wisdom. And I think that everybody, and I'm sure all your listeners, have that in common and share that. So we could quite legitimately consider ourselves all as philosophers, really. It's not just old guys in tweed suits, smoking a pipe somewhere. It's like anybody who is compelled and attracted to the knowledge and the wisdom and the gnosis that we see all around us in the universe.
Yeah, that is so right on key, and it was interesting because when I did review your book, I always open up to a page and I start reading, and I opened up right to the beginning of chapter 13, and chapter 13 was all about, if I remember correctly, thought control and how people mainly the government and other powers that be, have controlled us through language manipulation. Why don't you speak to us more about that? Because it's so insidious. I don't think that people actually realize it's happening.
Yeah, that's an interesting place to start from. I think one of the things that I have found very, very significant in my life and my learning, and this is what I've really endeavoured to show in the book and share in the book, because it's always a personal thing, really. It's not saying, look, everybody, do it this way. I'm saying, look, everybody, this is what I did. And I think it's kind of interesting, and you might find it applicable. One of the themes is saying the shadow stuff, the dark stuff in life, has a very intimate relationship with the light stuff, the conscious, the good stuff in life. And actually, they're kind of like actors playing opposite roles, polarizing forces. So you often find with New Age people and self-development people that they shy away from the shadow stuff. And I say to those people, if you're doing that, you're missing out, baby. You're missing out on half of life, because it's kind of there for a reason. And particularly today, in the those born in the late 20th century and now, of course, in the early 21st century, we can't help but look around and see that there is a lot of deception and there is a lot of chicanery in particularly politics and military and corporatism and so on. And I really say in the book that we have this sort of state of concealment, and a lot of people start off in life like that, and that you think you knew what was going on, but you don't really. You are concealing yourself, from each other, from the universe. And in that state of concealment, we are apt to take in and believe false notions about ourselves and the world we live in. And again, this reaches into every area of our lives and is patterned into us from birth, from our parents, teachers, schools, universities, colleagues, television, magazines, everything. All of those things have to be sort of rigorously reevaluated from a position of absolute honor and truth. No cheese, no deception, no varnish, no wishful thinking. A sort of total Buddhist style seeing things as they are. Not what we'd like them to be, but what they really are. And then we can start to sort of rewire better, more appropriate, more functional ways of being. So for some people that means politics. Is Obama a good person who believes in people? Is Mitt Romney a good person who believes in people? Do they represent us? Do the government care about us? That's a question that has to be asked. A lot of people start in that position and then kind of find themselves spiraling into conspiracy research and stuff, which has its place and has some very legitimate and valid things to say. But I'm sure you've seen this in your travels and your work, that you do occasionally come across people who have sort of gone too deep into that, and it's like a swamp and it's sucked them down, and they're sort of struggling for air, and everything is conspiracy, everything is paranoia, everything is somebody doing something horrible to someone else. And I don't really see it like that. I think that shadow, in a way, is a representation of a state of spiritual disavowal. That's everybody's responsibility. So the more we disown our spiritual journey, the more weird shadow stuff kind of spews out into the world. So I see that we each have a responsibility for creating those dark events in the world, and they all lead back kind of to the same place, really, which is consciousness. So to get to the solutions, to get to the real resolution of that stuff, you don't just mess around with the pieces on the game board. You go back to the source of all that, which is our own consciousness. So I always bring it back to the individual, to how they live, what they do, how they communicate, what their emotional state is, what the philosophy is, how they create reality. Because if you're not creating your own reality, as I've said once before, then someone else will do it for you.
I completely agree, but I want to diverge for a second and talk about what happened in Colorado. You're familiar with that, right?
I am, yes.
Okay, so he definitely explored his shadow self.
Yes, he did.
How does that incident help the rest of us?
Well, we have yet to find out all the detail about that, so it's a little bit like we've read the headlines. We've seen this guy with orange hair looking rather morose, sat in a room, who apparently shot a load of people in a movie theatre. And we've seen the headlines, we've seen some sort of whatever depositions and some charges brought forth and so on and so forth. We don't know enough yet to actually fully take a look at that and make any sort of definitive statements. We have to let a little bit of time go by and more data come out. Like, the Columbine shootings or whatever, you have to wait for a little bit of time. Like 9/11, any sort of big disastrous event, whatever the scale of it is, the profundity is the same, which is it appears to be, in principle, a sort of total dereliction of human integrity. Somebody somewhere has flipped out and taken life, and that's inappropriate, it's unacceptable, and it's not the normal human way of being. So when I see that, I see somebody, whoever that person is, and for whatever reason, who has been diverted from their own natural spiritual path, from their own ascendance, from their own ethical and moral framework, and has gone into a path of destruction, a path of total unconscious, disturbing behavior. And of course we can see that all over the place. But if we're to ask, well, what does that mean? How does that help us? Well, it's sort of like the optimal negative path you can take is to destroy. You can destroy people, you can destroy buildings, you can destroy the environment, you can destroy the planet, you could destroy a sun if you had the sufficient technology. Is to destroy things, is to take one form and make it go away. And philosophically speaking, we could say that that represents an extreme polarity that we see very often in the world today. And it represents, in a way, what happens when somebody detaches themselves completely from their purity, from their honor, from their integrity. We can't really talk too much about the guy in question because, as I say, we don't know. But if we say that very often these issues bring up discussions about gun control, discussions about safety, morality, restrictions, there are many implications of it, many ramifications of it, and a lot of, as I say, conspiracy people will immediately assume that there's some control going on there, that there's some kind of Manchuria candidate who may be a disturbed young man who is set up to go off like a time bomb, basically. And some people very often will jump to that conclusion, but we need to take a look at that. Personally, for me, from a metaphysical angle, I would say that is a tragedy on a human scale. That is a tragedy on a personal scale for those who have lost family and friends and so on in that situation. What I see is that destruction, if you bring it right into the mainstream, is always the number one headline. So it's imbalanced in that we're never given the counterbalance of that, which is a suitable creation that also happened on that day, in that place, in that environment. We only ever get the shadow news. That's what makes the headlines. So we are tempted to believe that it's all going to hell in a handcart, as it were. The whole place is in a state of diminishment. We're in the Kali Yuga, as the Hindus might put it, and it's all going wrong. I don't believe that's true. I think that when you're in a shift, a time of a big paradigm shift, which I think we are now, and people are starting to retrieve their power that they've been given away to politicians and to authority figures for so many centuries. When you're in a state of transition, polarity kind of springs out to the extremes. So you get extraordinary shadow like that situation. And you also get extraordinary light, extraordinary creation, which is also out there every day being amazing. We don't see that, though, on CNN and ABC and Fox. They don't broadcast that stuff. So we always get an imbalanced view in the media, and that's the main thing that immediately springs to mind when I look at that.
I agree. I read in your book, you were talking about the BBC and how well it's honored and respected. And I'm like, yeah. And then I get a few more sentences down and you're like, well, it's all rubbish. And I'm like, huh? And I shared how the news is about the negative and we tend to, follow that negative. We almost in some degree need that negative, that shadow in our life. We hear it, we ingest all of this negative, gritty, gray information, and then we wonder how horrible things happen to us or we do horrible things to someone else.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you're looking at the news, you have to say, let's not just examine the 10 things that they report every night at 6 o'clock or in the newspaper or whatever, but who's putting forth that agenda? Who decides what the top news is? Who's deciding that? Why are there no stories about growth, about ascendance, about spirituality? Why are there no stories about consciousness? Why are there no stories about creation? Why is that never in the news? And when it is, it's sidelined as something comical or obscure, or it gets a little segment where the newscasters are laughing about it. Why is that not important? Why is the incredible ascendant human journey not part of the daily news broadcast? Why is it only the things that have gone wrong, the mess-ups? Why is that the news? And that's a question that I think we have to ask ourselves, because it's been like that from the 50s, from day one, period. That's what it is. The news is a negative broadcast. And, of course, you could say, well, there's other things as well. There's stuff about sport and weather and entertainment, and that's fine, okay? That's fine, that has its place. But the news agenda itself is a negative transmission. And when everybody switches a screen on in the room for a negative transmission, ritualistically, every single day, I have to question what that's about. I don't think that's what we normally do. So if people get together in a restaurant or a bar or around a campfire or in a community hall or something, it's more balanced than that. People might have a little gossip, but they also talk about funny stuff. There's humor. When you see people get together, how is that defined? Usually by laughter, right? Human beings naturally find a point of equilibrium in their discourse. They will discuss broadly and fairly and deeply. Even the simplest of minds, right up to the most sophisticated, they will take a breadth of issues. That isn't represented in the news, so the news does not represent normal human life.
Now, I am a strong advocate and have been for years of not, watching the news, or if you have to watch the news, make it as early as possible so that you're not watching the 11 p.m. news and going to sleep, because I think that's the absolute worst. People have always asked me, well, then how do you figure out what's going on? And my contention is if you talk to enough people, you will find out what you need to know. And it's not necessarily, the big bad negative news out there, but what's just going on in the world. What are your thoughts around that?
That's a great question. Being a philosopher, I am often reminding myself to examine the question before I start to give the answer. So in this case, if we say, how do we find out what's going on in the world? What do we mean by what's going on? Do we mean in our living room, in a kitchen, in the bathroom? Do we mean in the building? Do we mean the street, the community? Do we mean in Syria or Iran or, Timbuktu? What do we mean by that? What's going on? There are trillions of events happening all the time in parallel around this little tiny planet. There are so many things going on. The real question is, how do we determine from the things that are going on what have the greatest relevance and what have connections to what we're doing in our life? And I think that's a good question to ask on the back of what you say, to say, well, it's more about appropriateness and relevance and a bit of a new agey word, but resonance. What resonates with what we're doing? So when you start to do that, you quickly come to the idea that it would be very ludicrous to expect anybody to be in a position to deliver that for you. Nobody can do that. Nobody can say, well, here we go, Monique, let me give you what the news is that is most appropriate for you and your life, for your ascendancy, for your personality, and for your likes and dislikes. That's not possible. Only you can do that. So we realize and recognize that if you want to find out what the news agencies are talking about, then you can set up a little web page very easily in 5 minutes, which will pull in a feed from 50 different news agencies, from 50 different networks, in 50 different countries. And you can look at your page, your web page, and make some correlations. You can make some conclusions about that. If you only do it through one outlet, like, say, the BBC or CNN, then you're going to get one perspective, and it's going to be biased, and it is going to be prejudiced. And whoever says otherwise is deceiving themselves, because it's always been like that. And I highlight very specific examples of that in my book. If you want to find out what's going on, you also have to go out and look in your community and read books and speak to people and engage with the world and participate in the world. That's the real way, as you very accurately put it. Speak to people is a very legitimate way of finding out what's going on, because you get a totally raw feed about that. You're not getting it filtered and serviced and manipulated in text. You're getting it from people's mouths, and you're getting it from the homeless guy on the street corner, from the attorney in his office, from the lady in the, grocery store, whatever. So you're getting different perspectives. And I think that's the key. Getting many different perspectives is very important. You can't rely on one. If you do, expect to have a skewed view.
Okay. Now, what's your take on the social media today? Facebook, Twitter, and all the other ones that are out there?
I think they can have some uses. If you're a teenage girl and you want to hang out with your friends and listen to the latest music and show what shoes you've got on, that's kind of fun, I suppose. When you move beyond that, I would question the relevance and the usefulness of it, although, of course, in our line of work, we all use those things a little bit as contact points. It's like anything. It's like saying, what do you think about the telephone system? What do you think about television broadcasting? What do you think about the internet? That framework is very useful. What you have to do is examine who's owning it and what they're doing with it and how much control do we get over it. That's the real question. So as long as there's a high level of control by the end user, I generally like a lot of technology. If there isn't a lot of control and it's very squirreled away how those technologies are deployed and manipulated, and if the source of that technology is hidden, i.e. it's not open source technology, then I question it. So I always like to try and find the best alternatives where the user is given a lot of control over it.
You had mentioned in your book, and this is a little bit off topic, but still in the same vein, and that is that there was a very slow decline, in your opinion, in the vocabulary across America. And when I read that, my first thought was Twitter. And I thought that only because everything has to be, 140 characters, 80, 60, however many it is, and everything has to be truncated. And so after a while, you start writing, instead of today, T-O-D-A-Y, it's 2-D-A-Y, and you're putting U instead of Y-O-U. What are your thoughts around that? I mean, I think we're undermining ourselves for the future with communication like this.
Yeah, I think in the book I give the example of George Orwell's novel 1984, where this guy in the book, Winston, works for the Ministry of Information, and it's really a direct reflection of Orwell's very own, very real-life operations with the British Ministry of Information at the time. And what he was suggesting in the book is that it's been long accepted from the sort of 1930s and 40s onwards that manipulating language is a more effective weapon than any sort of bomb or bullet or gun or whatever. And he was saying that by reducing the amount of vocabulary available to individuals, you can reduce the clarity and depth of their perceptions. So if people get used to communicating with a very thin layer of language and a very paltry level of vocabulary, then you can't really ever express anything of a fine nature, of a high nature. You can't really ever get your hands around an idea and articulate it as beautifully and as properly as you might want to do. So I really always encourage, let's take control of the technology, let's take control of the language. Same thing. That set of symbols belongs to us, no one else. We create it, it's ours. So let's use the language in all its richness, and let's create new words, and let's drop words that, are sort of getting misused, and let's create better ones. And let's revel, and let's not be ashamed to use language to its fullest. You know what it's like if like three, barbecuing baseball guys get together and somebody uses a word of like 12 letters or more, the others will laugh and say, whoa, what's that you're saying? It's become kind of uncool in a way in some sectors of society to have a rich, vivid vocabulary. And I'm trying to bring that as an important thing to consider, but also as a fun thing to say, no, language is really good. If you have a powerful command of language, not only can you shape ideas very well for yourself, more importantly, you can share it with other people, and you can learn better, you can learn deeper, and you can learn faster. And there is a little correlation between how many words you have command of and how smoothly that process goes. So I think it's very important, and I think if you're used to reading newspapers and magazines and books that have a very, limited set of symbols in them, a very limited language, if you then go to another book that's well written, and whatever it may be, fiction or anything, and look at a really, really rich language set, it's such a pleasure and such a joy, and you tend to find that the guy or girl who's written that book is suddenly pinning down ideas that you'd only just fleetingly pass through your brain. Someone else has felt it too, and they've not only have they felt it, but they have illustrated it in words very, very beautifully, and that creates connections between us. It enables us to share our dreams and our visions properly with each other.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Well, we have a caller. We have Jay from Alberta calling in. Hello, Jay.
Hey, Monique. How's it going?
It's good. How are you?
Hey, pretty good. And how about yourself? Again, I'm just a little tired.
That's okay. You have a question for Neil?
Yes, I do. Whose phone was it ringing in there a second ago? I just was curious. Was that yours?
I was in another room, like 4 rooms away in my house. It's just up loud, so sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. Sorry, no problem. No, I thought it was the phone going, oh. Anyhow, in regards to what you're talking about, I just wondered, that you said about the vocabulary. I noticed that, too, is that, like, I have a boss right now who doesn't speak very much, but talks, on the phone very, very easily. But I just wondered, the technology you're saying is it really training us to be more, I don't know, less concentrated, less smart or less creative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to be careful in saying, is the technology there to dumb us down? Probably not. I don't think so. Can technology be used to dumb people down? Yes, it can. Just like it can be used to smarten people up. So there is a funny irony in this, in that until email started to become popular in 95, 96, 97, people had stopped writing. Normal, regular people in the street had stopped writing letters. People weren't really doing that so much, except on special occasions. Now, more people are actually writing because they sit down on the laptop or whatever with Windows or the Mac or whatever, and they will write and they will construct sentences and they will construct text and they will construct language. So for those who enjoy it, actually emails had a beneficial effect, that it's got more people writing. What I'm saying is that what is it that we're writing? How is it that we're expressing ourselves? And we tend to feel that, particularly with English at high school, say, that really it's just to equip you so you can read and so you can write basic things. Dear sir, I am applying for, a new motor vehicle license, whatever. Just so you can write a basic document. What English really is, and what it used to be, even in the sort of 30s and 40s in Britain and America and Europe, is to say, look, language isn't just something we use to communicate basic stuff to each other. It actually changes how we think. You try and think about something without using words in your head. Try and think about any complex issue or even any simple issue, and we think in words. So the amount of words you have a command of affects your ability to think, the depth of your thoughts. That's why it's so important. So if you see high school kids not interested in English and an apathetic English teacher, if they're unlucky, then they're going to stop really giving a toss about language at an early age. And, very often by the age of 25, most people are not really interested in learning about language or enriching the vocabulary or whatever. If you've been lucky, on the other hand, to have a brilliant English teacher who enthuses you about language and says, look, English is exciting, language is really amazing, and if you speak English in particular, it's one of the richest, most amazing languages in the world, and it can help you to think better. It's not just about what we write down to communicate, it's about how we actually think.
Interesting. And you were talking about, just listening to a show is really actually fascinating. Great guest you have on, Monique. In regards to, you're talking about the dark side stuff of ourselves. It almost like you were saying, it reminds you of like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, where he recognizes the dark side of him. I just wondered, does the universe actually work in more of a balance? It seems like it's more balanced. If we're confronted with negativity all the time, there's a balancing act, is there? Like if you're confronted with like negative images and TV and stuff like that, and media that is all pretty well, negative stuff. Then the balancing of the act is to cut down on media and find the more positive stuff. Would that be your interpretation of that?
Yeah, I think again that's a really nice point. What we're saying about the news is if the news of events in the world is always negative, then it's out of balance. We can state that quite clearly, I think. The news is out of balance. Therefore, people who seek balance, who want to know about the dark stuff, the destructive stuff, also the light stuff and the creative stuff, people who seek, a more equitable position and say, well, life's about both of those things. Some things get created, some things get destroyed. That's life. Then we have to, as you say, take control of your own media input and output and not assume that something important is being said on television. Don't assume that. That's a false notion. What's important, in a way, for you personally, for me personally, for everybody, is what we decide is important. And even though it might be important to someone else, it might not be to us. And that's our prerogative to decide what's important and what isn't. And my view on it is to say that even though there's a lot of negative stuff in the world, there's also an awful lot of positive, amazing stuff in the world. And I think it's healthy and a wholesome thing to do to make sure that news of those things comes into your home, comes into your mind, comes onto your screen or your page. So I make sure that I do that. I might want to read about massacres in Rwanda with, millions of people getting slaughtered. I might want to know about that and research it and study it and look at historical precedents for that. I also want to know about the amazing things that people are doing with agriculture in North Africa and generating clean drinking water and generating renewable energy sources. So I want a balanced view on that. And I think that's really important. So we have to not assume that just because there's like an old guy with a nice suit on speaking authoritatively on television, that he's telling us something that we should believe is important. That's not true.
That's amen to that. JD, do you have anything else for Neil?
Yes, Neil, I just wondered, the stuff that it seems like I look at the bad stuff that in my life that has happened usually is something that's good, where it's leading friends and stuff like that. And I look at nature sometimes is when we have a rainstorm. Usually after a rainstorm, in daytime, usually there's a rainbow right after that and sunshine appears. And I just wondered, some events that have happened in our lives and some events that happen out in public, for example, the Aurora shooting, is there always something positive always that comes up after that? And is it always a cycle that always happens in our lives that, it's like a rainstorm, where you have the clouds and then you have the rain, you have clouds, rain, and then you have the rainbow and the sunshine that comes out. Is it just like a cycle for all of us?
You have a very enlightened audience, Monique. This guy's good. You should get him on the show.
Oh, I love Jay.
Okay, yeah, again, a really interesting point. The more negative the outward signs of life are, culture, politics, wars, crime, degradation, whatever. In a way, the more work we have to do on ourselves. But as you say, a positive angle on that is that it is in these times of darkness where something, like you say, a big storm comes, then the air clears, a rainbow appears. In those times, we also see the greatest potential for real spurts of growth and beauty and clarity and creation. And those shadow elements of the world, I think we can properly say, are more what I call negative attractors. They serve as a sort of key polarizing force in the universe. So negativity in itself, philosophically speaking, is really about dissolution. And that means it's also about renewal. Because, for example, if a forest burns down, the forest fire is part of its renewal cycle, and it's part of the ecology of a forest. To have it destroyed in that way means that new growth can come, the soil can regenerate properly, and a more active state of equilibrium can be attained in that very sensitive and delicate ecology. So if you're a little bird and you live on a branch of a tree, and the forest burns down, it looks like disaster. It's the end of the world, isn't it, from that perspective? If you're an old guy who lives down the road in a little house by the river, and you've seen this 10 times in your life, you have a different perspective on that. You think, well, these things happen. These are the things that happen. These negative forces do have an effect in the universe. And from a certain perspective, it's okay, because ultimately they lead to innovation and regeneration. But we do have to sometimes go through these periods of instability in the meantime, and that's true collectively when we look at things on the television, but also personally as well. If we get divorced, or if we go bankrupt, or if we break our leg, or some misfortune, or some little disaster like that, often you will find with people who have clarity and strength of purpose in their life that those events ultimately can serve as springboards for something better, something truer, something stronger. And it's almost as if, I often say, the universe often wraps great gifts in crisis, and you have to unwrap that crisis to get to the gift inside it.
Interesting.
True.
Very, very interesting. Very true. Well, Jay, anything else?
That's. I got enough. I don't know.
I tell you what. I think this guy's just done three amazing points. I think we should let him go and say thank you, sir. Great points.
Yeah, I've got more than enough to cover, Jay. So, okay. All right. Thanks so much,
Neil. Thanks so much, Nate.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks for your contribution. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye. Neil, we've been talking about vocabulary and such, but, what I want to bring up is our emotions, because to me, sometimes our emotions are wrapped up in our vocabulary, and our vocabulary is wrapped up in our emotions. Is that something that resonates with you, first of all?
Yes, very important. Emotional alchemy is something that I often teach and talk about and discuss with people. I give presentations about it. I'm giving one later this month about it. It's very important. Emotions are a very, very important bit of the sort of spiritual toolkit, definitely.
Well, how can we come to some type of emotional centeredness? I mean, if something happens, sometimes it'll just send us off the deep end and we're all in despair. We can't, see the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how brightly it's shining at us. Other times we're just so high that we forget that at some point in time we're going to come down to at least a level, our level. So how do we keep all of that in check?
Well, I think that begins with a recognition that your emotions are kind of like aerials, kind of like a sonar that give you indications about the way you feel at the very deep inner level, just like, a submarine or whatever has these pings that say, this is what the terrain looks like inside. You can't see it, it's deep and dark, there's no light here, but you can use this kind of sonar to ping what's going on inside yourself. So in one aspect, the emotions rather work like that for me. They also, though, from a more multi-dimensional perspective, reach outside of ourselves and tell us things about the world around us. And I think we have to recognize that equipment, if you like, that technology, that organic technology that we have, the emotional set of energies that we appropriate through our bodies, they're there for our use. and we shouldn't assume that we are slave to them and that they rule us. They're not. They're ours. They're ours. The signals come in. What we then do with that signal, how we process that signal, is up to us. And that's why I call it emotional alchemy, because like in alchemy, you take one substance and transform it into another, like, traditional laboratory alchemy. We can take this same basic approach with emotions, and particularly where we might perceive we have any sort of inappropriate, destructive emotional responses. Don't make the mistake of thinking that you can't do something about that. Not block it. You can't block an emotion as such. It's always going to come. We don't want to swallow them down. What we want to do is let it come up, know what it is, be with it, sit with it, let it permeate us, and then where necessary, realize that we can transform that by giving a certain perspective on it. So let's say jealousy, for example. We can purify that and say, well, jealousy is really about a confusion. And we can change that, transform it, and say, well, that confusion can be refined to become a clarity. So we can remove any sort of initial offending, crude response, not the emotion itself, but the response. And as you say, what is jealousy, for example? We all might feel that at times, whether we're just in the schoolyard and somebody has, the most fantastic new running shoes on, Nike running shoes that are like $200, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm jealous, I've got these crappy little shoes on, and this guy's got the best shoes in the whole schoolyard on, and I feel jealous. Why do we feel jealous? What is that? So we have to deconstruct it, like the alchemist would do. He would burn the thing down in his crucible and say, well, what is it we're talking about here? What is jealousy made up of? What's the recipe for it? When we start to specify what those recipes are, as it were, we can go back to the root of it and realign what is actually occurring inside us at the energetic level. And it's always a personal thing, but the principles of it can be discussed and shared, which I, do so in the book. So again, if you take a response like, let's say, one day some guy with red hair smacks you around the side of the head when you're 5 years old, and then you spend the rest of your life having a sneaking suspicion about red-haired people. Now, if you're not conscious, you might just wander around and have this kind of prejudice against people with red hair. If you go back and trace that fear, trace that anger, trace that distrust, you realize that it goes back to this formative event. And then you can say, well, it's no longer appropriate for me to be running that wiring anymore, so I need to rewire that. That circuit isn't appropriate as a 55-year-old adult anymore. I don't want to be doing that right now. I don't need to have that prejudice because it's not true. It's actually not true. So we go back and examine that wiring and rewire it. So you become conscious of what the current state of the wiring is, and then you rewire it by almost sitting down and designing, well, what is a more appropriate response? What is a better thing to do? Now I'm not in a state of fear and anger. I can generate a more compassionate and fair and honourable response to whatever I want to do. So you always have to rewire with your sort of optimum state of wisdom and knowledge, which is, hopefully where we're at any given moment. But we can always go back and detect wiring that wasn't serving us very well, particularly things with prejudice or fear, self-worth, self-esteem, those things that we all, will have doubts and wobbles about now and again, and say, well, where is that coming from? Let us trace this back to its roots. And usually, all those emotional confusions come from the first kind of 7 years of life. And you can, there are many different techniques and ways of going back and doing something about that. You don't have to live in that state of doubt, of wondering about your self-worth. Are you worthy enough to lead a fabulous, brilliant life? Yes, we can all say that intellectually, but to feel it, you have to have a clear emotional palette. And sometimes that means we have to do a little bit of rewiring, a little bit of purification, and that's normal. That's what human beings can do. It's one of our powers, and it's just sometimes we forget how to do that. So now and again, different people come along, talk about it in different ways, and share different techniques for doing that.
Okay. Well, Neil, our hours is almost up, and you have so much profound information within this book. What is, in your opinion, the single most important message of your book?
Wow, that's a big question, isn't it? I would say, fundamentally, the biggest message of the book is to have a deep recognition of the truly magnificent scale and depth of this world that we're in. It's just far more mysterious and wonderful and adventurous and multidimensional than we have been led to believe. And I would hope that by the time somebody has finished reading that book, if they didn't already know so, they will have a very clear feeling about that and will be enthusiastic about the adventure of being a human being on Earth and say, wow, what a sacred, interesting, intriguing experience it is to be here. And that is the perspective that I am very happy to share and talk about in detail in the book. And by the end of it, there's many angles. Each chapter deals with a different angle of that observation. And when you put them all together, I think it's quite a compelling argument to say, if you change some perspectives, some approaches, some philosophies, life becomes very fulfilling, very adventurous. And for anyone who's ever struggled with aspects of life or struggled with their own self-esteem and so on, that's a very valid thing to do, is to say, well, it's about perspectives. The whole thing is about how you view something. And that's what this book specializes in, giving different kinds of views about some things you thought you knew, and definitely some things you will know nothing about, which this book will introduce and ask the reader to form their own conclusions.
It definitely allows you to expand your mind should you wish to expand, and I do appreciate that. Now, you do have some seminars coming up, and also share with us how you work with people. I think you have a unique way of working with people.
Yeah, I have a workshop, a seminar coming up August the 25th called Unfoldments, Secrets and Synchronicity, and that's just up near Hood River in Oregon. So anyone on the anyone who can travel, please come over. Would love to see you there. Anyone who's in Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Eugene, Salem, whatever, North California, come along to that fantastic place, fantastic weekend, and we're going to be talking about a lot of the subjects that we've covered in this discussion. If you go to neilkramer.com, you can see in the events section all about that. And as you say, I also do teaching work as well, coaching work if you like, and that is very much geared towards giving people guidance and inspiration to do with what I call the inner work, to discuss the connection between self, intellect and spirit, and it's really about empowerment. That's what it's really aiming to do. Anybody who wants to juice up their empowerment and their ability to take control of their lives, to find that centeredness, to find that happy balance and dynamic, that is what I aim to do for people. So anyone who's interested in that, if you go to the website neilkramer.com and look at the teaching section, you can read about that and read some testimonials of some of the people I've worked with.
Okay. Well, Neil, thank you so much. Thank you ever so much for the information in the book. And when you get the next one out, do give me a call. I'd love to have you back on.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it, and it's been lovely talking to you, Monique.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. And I'd like to thank the listeners for being with me this hour. I do appreciate your time and attention. I'm truly honored. When you're ready to remove the blocks that are holding you back, give me a call. I can help. Give me a call at 888-240-6057. And please remember that the most important choice that you make is what you choose to make important, and that your net worth starts with your self-worth. Many blessings, light and love to all. Namaste.